Enterprise Manager allows users to check if their assets, such as hosts and databases, are in compliance with industry standards, Oracle best practices, and their own internal organizational policies and recommendations. The users can achieve this by using the Enterprise Manager compliance user interface. So let's take a look at the Enterprise Manager by logging in first. The primary focus of this session is to demonstrate how a database administrator can use Enterprise Manager to check the compliance of database targets against Center for Internet Security, also called as CIS industry standard. The starting point of this exercise is the library view in the compliance menu. The library view can be pulled up from here. The library view is organized into various compliance artifacts which follow a hierarchical structure. There are compliance frameworks, compliance standards, and compliance rules, which are of relevance for this session. The compliance rule is the single unit of compliance check to be performed against the desired target. The compliance standard is a collection of one or more rules, and the compliance framework is a collection of one or more standards. So to begin our demonstration today, we'll take a look at the CIS framework. So the compliance CIS framework contains it's a collection of standards. The compliance CIS framework contains two standards, one for the cluster database and the other for the single instance database. The point to be noted here is that compliance standards and compliance rules are specific to target types, and they map to one and only one target type. So we'll take a look at the compliance standard for single instance database. So you can go back, you can take a look at the standard from this page by clicking on the compliance standard, which brings up this view. Or the user can also go to the library view and pick up the compliance standard. So as you can see, there are two compliance standards, one for the cluster database target and the other for a single instance database. We'll take a look at the standard for single instance database. The compliance standard has more than 100 rules as prescribed by CIS. The rules are organized into rule folders, and the rule folders correspond to the high-level categories defined by CIS benchmark. So if you look at the individual rule folders, you'll see the rules which are part of those categories. In some cases, there are subcategories under those rule folders. As you expand, you can see all those rules. So the broad level categories are Oracle database installation and patching requirements, which includes some basic rules related to default passwords and so on. And then there are Oracle parameter settings, in which there are rules around the database initialization parameters. Then there are some connection and login restrictions related rules. Then in the next category, there are Oracle user access and authorization restrictions. Under that category, there are further subcategories, specifically talking about default public privileges for packages and object types, and excessive system privileges role privileges, and so on. And finally, there is a category for audit policies and procedures. The standard, compliance standard, is the only artifact out of all the compliance objects available in compliance library that can be associated to a target. And associating a compliance artifact, in this case compliance standard, basically begins the process of performing the compliance evaluations on those targets. The user can associate compliance targets to standards by selecting the specific standard and either associating the standard to one or more targets, or associating the associating the standards to one or more groups. So associating this standard to targets can be done by opening the associate targets dialog box. Here, one or more targets matching the target type for which the standard has been created are displayed for selection, and the user can select one or more targets. So once the targets are selected and then the user confirms the selection, the process of associating the targets begins. And once the targets are successfully associated, the compliance checks begin. Now, most important thing to be noted here is that the compliance checks are initiated at this moment, as well as they are also scheduled to be run every 24 hours. So the targets undergo a continuous compliance check once they are once the target is associated to a certain compliance standard. The checks are performed on an ongoing basis by the enterprise manager agents, and the enterprise manager agents send the configuration data based on which the rules are evaluated for success and failure. So let's click on confirming the association, which will initiate the process of associating the standard and start the compliance checks. Okay, so the dialog box confirms that the compliance standards were submitted to target for processing. So let's take a look at the results page. The results page for compliance can be accessed from the same menu. So the compliance results are organized again in the same hierarchy of artifacts. There are compliance framework specific results, compliance standard specific results, and then there is a tab for target compliance. The grid view shows the high level aggregated results at the standard level. And for this standard, you obviously see the target type it's applicable to, and the number of targets evaluated plus their overall status. So in this case, there are 2 targets evaluated, which is what we selected. And their overall status is they are not compliant because there are some failures. The next column in the grid shows the count of number of basically the violations and their severity. So in this case, it's showing more than 300 violations. And then finally, it's showing an average score, average compliance score of this compliance operation for this standard. Taking a look at the result details, we will find out what is the score at the individual compliance, what is the level of compliance of each target, and which rules have been violated. So the details view is again organized in this format. You have the actual compliance standard and rules on the left hand side in a view similar to the library view, and then the results are on the grid on the right hand side in a grid. The results show the compliance levels at each individual target level, and it also shows the overall pie chart for the standard. So in this case, as you can see, one database has 153 violations, while the other one has slightly more violations than that. And the score for the second target is 0, which essentially means that nearly all rules, or in fact all rules probably have been violated. The reason the number of violations is more than the number of rules is because one rule failure can generate multiple violations depending on the nature of the rule. I mean, to take an example, if the rule talks about, or the rule is supposed to check security or login permission settings for database users, then there can be multiple database users that violate the rule. Hence, the number of violations are more than the total number of rules. Expanding the rule folders opens the view of all the rules that have failed. And you can select a specific rule and look at the violation details for that rule. For instance, in this case, the rule has failed for both the targets, but the number of violations are different. And clicking on the violation count pulls up the violation details. So in this case, the rule is ensure failed login attempts is less than or equal to 5. But as you can see, the setting is not less than or equal to 5. In fact, the setting is default, the default setting with which every database is configured. And that's why it's a violation. And the database is essentially insecure. Now, you can also take a look at a full list of violations if you select the standard and click on the count. In this case, it will open up the same tabular view, and it will list all the rules and the corresponding violations. Clicking on the violation count will again pull up the violation details, such as this. Now, let's take a look at specific violations and the reasons why the violations have originated. So we can take a look at this category, Oracle user access and authorization restrictions. Under this category, you have various subcategories, and one of them is default public privileges for packages and object types. Expanding that, we will see that all the rules have been violated. And if we specifically select, let's say this particular rule, we will see that there is one violation on each of the targets. Now, selecting the rule obviously allows us to take a look at the violation count. In addition, you can go to this violation events tab to take a closer look at the violation for a specific target. So in this case, let's take a look at this insecure DB target. So selecting that specific violation pulls up a lot many details about the violation metadata, and more importantly, it brings up the recommendations for the violations. In this case, it says to remediate this setting, execute the following SQL statement and the actual SQL command, which is what has been specified by CIS benchmark in their documentation. So one can remediate this violation by executing this on the SQL prompt. It's also possible to remediate this violation by specifying a corrective action in Enterprise Manager. Alternatively, the user can also decide to or choose to ignore this violation by going to the results tab and going to the manage violations tab and suppressing those violations. Now in this case, let's try to remediate by actually executing this command and see how the results change once the command has been executed. So these are the commands that we will execute, and we will try to remediate 3 rules which have been violated. So as you can see, there was a violation for UTL file, there was a violation for UTL IN ADDR, and also for UTL TCP. So we basically performed the remediation action for all 3 rules. And let's see how the results reflect the changes that we made. So after the remediation actions have been performed and upon receiving the latest configuration, if you revisit the results page, you will see that the violation count has changed. As I mentioned, once you associate the targets to a compliance standard, the compliance evaluation is performed in an ongoing basis, and every 24 hours the latest collection is sent back to OMS for compliance evaluation. Purely for the demo purpose, I have forced a collection, but in the user environment, the re-evaluation will happen automatically. Now, as you can see, the violation count has gone down from 347 to 344 because of the 3 violations we remediated. We can go back to the result details and open the same view, open the same rule folder, same subcategory. And if we select the same rule that showed the violation, it still shows a violation at the top level, but right now the violation for that particular target has been remediated. Same is the case with the other 3 rules. The violation count for that particular target shows as 0. And for the other rules where the violation was not remediated, the violation count is still 1 for that particular target. So this is how the results show up after reevaluation. From this view, the user has an option to directly go to the target dashboard page to take a closer look at the target from a holistic point of view. And within that target dashboard, there is also a section for compliance. So there is this dashlet for compliance, which displays compliance specific information for the selected target. So as you can see, it shows one incident which says the compliance score is 41%, which is below the critical threshold. And it also shows that there is one compliance standard associated to this target, and the score for that standard is 41%. If you select that particular standard in this view, it will bring back the results view, but this time the result view is specific to only to that target. And then you can see the violation count and the score only specific to that target. Also, the pie chart reflects everything specific to that target. Now, if you pull up the same rule folder, then you will see that a number of rules do not show a violation because this target does not have any violation for many of those rules. And you can basically pull up the same subfolder that we were looking at, and then you will see that a number of rules do not show the violation, whereas the others still show a violation. So as you can see, the compliance score is a good indication of the level of compliance of this target against an industry standard, in this case, the CIS benchmark, which basically is indicating that the database is insecurely configured. And by following the exact procedure that we followed, basically to remediate all these violations, the target can be completely made secure or completely brought in compliance by remediating all violations one by one, just the way we showed in the demo. So this brings us to the end of today's demonstration of compliance feature in Enterprise Manager.